Yo, what's up everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be looking back at the record predictions that I made for each NFL team before week 1 of the NFL season. And I think it's kind of fun to look back at these predictions. My favorite thing about making predictions really is looking back and maybe realizing where I was wrong or what teams really surprised in the ways of either overperforming or underperforming, or what factors maybe led to teams doing better or worse than they were supposed to. That's honestly my favorite part of predicting, even with mock drafts and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of things. When you're making predictions, most of the time you can't really account for injuries and stuff like that, so I didn't really factor that in, and a lot of the places where I was wrong was due to injuries and stuff like that, especially with COVID. It was impossible to tell who was playing any week. So a lot of teams had their season basically stripped from them for that reason. But all in all, I've looked at my predictions. I think they're pretty good, honestly. They're pretty good. There's some teams that really surprised me, but all in all, I think they're pretty good. So it should be exciting. We're going to start out in the AFC East and just kind of work around. Also, I'm using a new software for this, so it might take me absolutely ages to edit. And I don't know how well it's going to work, really. I'm also recording this right after the last game on Sunday, so I have a lot of editing ahead of me, I guess. So starting out in the AFC East with the Bills. So for the way that I'm going to be ordering this, I am going to be doing, I'm going to start with the team that I had predicted to win the division and go first through fourth according to my predictions. I originally had the Bills going 12-5 and winning the division. They ended 11-6 and won the division. The only factor that I can really think of that makes the Bills a little bit worse than what I thought is my predicted play of Josh Allen. I really thought that Josh Allen was, going to play at the same level or even better than he did last year. I kind of had him as a potential MVP candidate this year. He was in the MVP race for quite a while last year. And we didn't quite see that level of Josh Allen, even though he was still a really good quarterback. Regardless, they still won the division, and I would be honestly scared to play them in the playoffs. They're one of those teams that I think could roll through the playoffs if you give them the chance to. I will be doing a playoff prediction. I think I'll probably release that around Friday, closer to when the playoffs are actually happening. Second in the division, I had slated as the Miami Dolphins. I had the Miami Dolphins going 10-7, and they ended 9-8 in real life. Honestly, I thought the Dolphins were a lot better than 10-7. It was just their schedule that really got them. The Dolphins ended last year really strongly. I thought, honestly, the last 5 weeks of the season last year, they were one of the best teams in football. And if they had gotten in the playoffs, again, I think they could have done something with a wild card spot, but they weren't given that chance, and they won't get that chance this year either. Ultimately, injuries plagued the Dolphins. They were without Tua for a while. They were still a pretty decent team. I thought they were going to do better. Their schedule also did them absolutely no favors this year. But overall, I think that they also, all they did in the offseason, all the Dolphins did was add pieces. All they did was add pieces on that defense. So I really thought the Dolphins had a chance of being a very good team this year, and it just didn't pan out. They're also a really young team, so it's not surprising. I think they only go up from here. So the first two, one off, not a big deal. However, the third team in the division I had being the New England Patriots. I had them going 7-10, and they ended 10-7. A lot of that, honestly, has to do with Mac Jones playing a lot better than I thought he would. That being said, Mac Jones, isn't the only saving piece. I also thought that a lot of their defense last year opted out. They didn't play. Even if you're getting a lot of those pieces back, a lot of those pieces were also aging pieces. And in my mind, I didn't think that aging pieces taking a year off of football, I was, a little bit scared away from that. They did add a lot of weapons on the offensive side of the ball, but even then, they added a lot of weapons that I wasn't really too sure about. I'm not big on Nelson Aguilar. But it all worked out. And they're one of those teams that definitely played a lot better than I had assumed that they would. Fourth in the division, I had as the New York Jets. I had them going 5-12, and they ended 4-13. So another one where I'm just one off. I I mean, I was pretty much right on with this team. They played about exactly how I had anticipated them to. I didn't really think that Zach Wilson would come out and play too well, and he didn't. I mean, there's a multitude of problems wrong with that Jets team. Their schedule did hand them some games initially, I thought, and that's why they ended up at 5-12. But even then, the Jets, obviously, they're one of those teams that have a lot to work through, and I wasn't too far off on my prediction. Now let's go out to the West and talk about the Kansas City Chiefs. I had the Kansas City Chiefs winning the division at 14-3. In real life, they went 12-5. They certainly played worse than I thought they would have. I mean, I can certainly see the reasoning behind it. Their defense, I feel like, took a step down overall this year. They also got out to that abysmal 1-3 start or something, something nuts. They started off the year really rough, and everybody was talking about them being dead last in the division for a minute there. And I honestly think that the second half of the season they were probably the best team in football, other than maybe the Packers. The second half of the season they were phenomenal, and they are the team that I think is my early favorite to win the AFC entirely. I would not want to have to run into the Chiefs, and I'm a Steelers fan, which means I have to run into the Chiefs, which is just great. One last blowout, I guess. I'm not feeling great about it. But I mean, there are definitely some parts of the Chiefs that are a lot worse than I thought they would be. Like I said, that defense, their O-line started off really rocky. I feel like they definitely came into their zone the second half of the season, which, given, I guess I probably should have predicted that. I couldn't have really predicted that Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill would miss time and that the Chiefs would get killed by COVID for a minute there. But overall, again, the Chiefs still did really well. And given all the time that everybody missed, I would say they probably performed about as I expected, especially once their O-line came into their zone. Now, the second team I had in the division was the Chargers. I had the Chargers going 9-8 originally, and they finished at 9-8. It's the first one in this thing so far that I've gotten exactly right. Given I still think the Chargers are a lot better than a 9-8 team. I thought that when I was predicting too. It's just their schedule did them absolutely no favors this year when I was looking through it initially. And the Chargers, again, I mean, they're a young team. They have a lot to look forward to. Justin Herbert exceeded my expectations, and I had pretty high expectations for him. Austin Eckler, too. I do think that they looked better than I expected, even if I thought they were better than a 9-8 team. Given I had them barely missing the playoffs, and they ended up barely missing the playoffs. But there's a lot to look forward to for that team, assuming that they can keep all their pieces and develop them properly. Now, the third team I had in the division was the Denver Broncos. I had the Broncos at 7-10, and they ended at 7-10, so back-to-back perfect picks, which is great because the team after this is probably the one that I missed the hardest in the entirety of the NFL. So, given I do think that the Broncos honestly probably played better than I expected. Teddy Bridgewater is the definition of a perfectly average quarterback in every way. It's amazing. It really is. The Broncos, what else? Their defense, I mean, I couldn't have predicted that Von Miller was going to get shipped away. I couldn't have done that. I thought their defense would take a step up because last year they really did make an emphasis to draft and sign cornerbacks. I thought Patrick Surtain played better than I expected, and I thought he was going to play well. So that defense really did come into his own. Even without Von Miller, I think that the defense played great. They're just kind of limited on the offensive side of the ball, I think. Jerry Jeudy missed a good chunk of time, too. So again, I think they're better than 7-10. They're one of those teams that kind of got an unlucky break. Now, the fourth team in the division, originally I had put the Raiders, and I think this is probably the biggest spread of me being wrong. The 5-game spread, because they went 10-7. I think it's probably the biggest miss that I had. They're the team that surprised me the most, honestly. I mean, the Raiders on paper are pretty unremarkable. They're one of those teams that's good at everything, but not great at anything, except, of course, Darren Waller. But that was wrong, honestly. I didn't really think much of the Raiders' secondary going into the year, and they proved me completely wrong. You know, they were starting Nate Hobbs. I didn't think there was a chance that would work out, and Nate Hobbs played really well. They also have, They have Casey Hayward, who every time I watched the Raiders, Casey Hayward was remarkable. He was really, really good. And him and Nate Hobbs made, honestly, one of the best corner pairs in the entirety of the NFL. And I could have never predicted that, honestly. That's why I love making predictions. Surprising stuff like that. Their D-line also played a lot better than I had anticipated. Their O-line was good. Brian Edwards emerged. Honestly, the Raiders are a lot better than 10-7. You know, I wasn't expecting Derek Carr to do quite as well as he did, especially with everything that happened, you know. With the coaching change and the 3 different scandals that happened, the fact that they are 10-7 is truly remarkable. I think they're a lot better than a 10-7 team. And honestly, they are the team that surprised me most in the entirety of the NFL. Now let's go up north in the AFC and talk about my team's division. Originally, I had the Ravens slated to win the division, going 12-5, and they ended at 8-9. The Ravens, honestly, are one of those teams that, I mean, they're certainly a lot better than 8-9. They are a contending team that ended at 8-9. The Ravens, honestly, spent a good portion of the season with half of their roster on the IR, or on the COVID list. They spent some time without Lamar. They lost, 3 running backs before the opening week. That all happened after that. I had predicted this. So, I do think that the Ravens are a lot better than 8-9. Obviously, they started out 8-3 this year, and then absolutely fell apart. But a lot of that had to do with injuries. That being said, even when their offensive line is healthy, I don't trust their offensive line. They made the acquisition of Alejandro Villanueva, and I spent a lot of time watching him do absolutely nothing. So, overall, though, the Ravens, I think they'll be back to contending if they can stay healthy really quickly. Second in the division, I had the Browns, who I also had going 12-5, but losing the tiebreaker to the Ravens. They also ended up finishing 8-9, for many of the similar reasons to the Ravens. The Browns had no lucky break with injuries this year at all. That being said, I do think they're a lot worse than the Ravens. They're a lot closer to 8-9 than the Ravens are. That's certainly apparent if you watch the Browns play. Baker Mayfield is... I honestly was very high on Baker Mayfield going into this year. I think I had him as like the 11th quarterback in the league or something. Like towards the back half of last year, Baker Mayfield put together an amazing half a season. And even in the wild card game, he looked phenomenal. I thought he would continue that. He didn't. That being said, Baker missed some time. Seemed like they never had their 2 running backs on the field at the same time. Either Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt was always hurt. The Browns really couldn't catch a lucky break. I thought their defense was going to be a lot improved. It wasn't. Their secondary was not nearly as good as I thought it would be. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who was my favorite player last year in the draft, JOK, played about as I expected. JOK played really good. If Mekhi Parsons didn't exist, I would expect him to get Defensive Rookie of the Year. Unlike the Ravens, though, I don't know what the future holds for the Browns. I really don't. I'd imagine there's a lot of guys that you can't retain. There's no way you hold on to Kareem and Nick Chubb for long term. There's no way that you hold on to, Austin Hooper, David Njoku, and Harrison Bryant long term. Their O-line is still one of the probably top 3 in football. And their defense is honestly, their secondary could be addressed. But I think, obviously their D-line has been good. I don't know what you do with Jadeveon Clowney or Takk McKinley. Obviously, you need to re-sign both of them. Or you could let them walk. But I don't think the future is quite as bright for the Browns than it is for the Ravens. I had the third team in the division as the Steelers. I had the Steelers finishing at 8-9, and they ended 9-7-1. The Steelers played about to what I expected, honestly. Najee Harris played even better than I thought he would, and I was pretty high on Najee Harris as a player. Maybe not for the Steelers, but as a player, I was high on Najee Harris, and he played better than I expected. The Steelers' defense was honestly a lot worse than I thought it would be. I knew that the secondary was going to be pretty awful. The Steelers are not good at cornerback at all. I didn't really expect that the linebacker position would become as big of a problem as it was. It kind of didn't help that Stephon Tuitt missed the entirety of the season. They were pretty empty in the middle, and it was shown. Every time a running back got a hole up the middle, he was going for 40 yards on the Steelers. It was rough. They basically kind of relied on Minkah Fitzpatrick and their edge rushers for most of the year to make plays. Their defense definitely took a step down. Offensively, their offensive line is atrocious. It is real bad. Their wide receivers did look nice, though. Pat Freiermuth looked better than I thought he would, even though, again, I was very high on Pat Freiermuth, just not for the Steelers. Obviously, Ben Roethlisberger didn't play amazing, and I didn't expect him to. They played probably about to what I would expect, maybe a little bit worse. I think they were, they got some lucky breaks here and there, and they will be in the playoffs. And again, they're another one of those teams where I don't know what the future holds if you're the Steelers. You have a lot of aging pieces and a lot of contracts to renew. You need to go find a new quarterback, which means that you can't spend a first-round draft pick on something else that you need most likely. So I don't really know what the Steelers' future holds. Now let's get to the fourth team in the division I originally had being the Bengals. I will be first to admit that I was very wrong about the Bengals. The Bengals ended up finishing 10-7. Honestly, the main reason I wasn't too high on the Bengals is because defensively the Bengals are not a very good football team. They really aren't. Their secondary is nice. The Bengals have a good secondary, but they're not nearly as solid in the middle. Plus, offensively, their offensive line played a lot better than I thought they would. When they didn't address offensive line, I was really worried for the Bengals organization, but they did just fine. Jamar Chase played a lot better than I expected, and again, I was very high on Jamar Chase. Again, maybe not to the Bengals, but I was very high on Jamar Chase. Joe Burrow honestly exceeded my expectations, and I was high on him too. The Bengals overall, really, they were another one of those teams that came out and really shocked me. I thought they were one of those teams that was probably, not this year, but next year. I thought they were in like the final year of their rebuild here, where they could go into next season, address the offensive line and holes on the defense, and next year they would be a playoff team. But they really came out and decided that now was the time, and I'm happy to see it. I can't wait to see what Joe Burrow and them do in the future. And they don't have, they should be good for a long time. They are a very young team. Now let's go down south and talk about the Tennessee Titans. I had the Tennessee Titans winning the division at 12-5, which is exactly what happened. That being said, the Titans, I think, are better than 12-5. They did a lot of that without Derrick Henry, which is truly remarkable. I thought, Derrick Henry was the reason that they were going to be 12-5. But to be able to get to that point without Derrick Henry for a good portion of the season is really remarkable. So good on them. That being said, there's a lot of pieces that I don't think Ryan Tannehill took a step up. I think he performed a lot worse than a lot of people were expecting him to, including myself. That being said, I think Julio Jones outperformed what I thought he would. Same with A.J. Brown. The team overall, they looked a lot better than I thought they were going to, and I think they're a threat in the playoffs, especially if you can get Derrick Henry back and healthy. Their defense held up a lot better than I had thought that they would. Again, I think they're definitely contending going into the postseason. The second team I had was the Colts. I had them going 10-7, and they ended at 9-8. The Colts are great on paper until you get to the quarterback position, and that is what I thought going into the season. Everybody was hyping up this Carson Wentz story, and I didn't really think it would pan out. Carson Wentz is, again, a pretty decent quarterback. He's not a guy that I think can win you games, though. He's one of those quarterbacks where if you're down 3 with a minute and a half left, I don't really trust Carson Wentz with the ball. He makes a lot of poor decisions, and he did again this year for the Colts. They're also without their first-round draft pick, so that's really tough, especially because the Eagles are in the playoffs and they're not. Losing to the Jaguars was huge for them. It could honestly spiral into something a lot worse than just one game, or just a one-loss game, or just a one loss. It could be a whole culture thing if you let it become that. But overall, I thought, honestly, the Colts played worse than I mean, the Colts are another team that dealt with a lot of injuries this year. Even before the season, Carson Wentz and Quentin Nelson were going to miss some time due to the same exact injury. Their defense played pretty solidly. Their offensive line is still good. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor exceeded mine and everybody else's expectations. I even had Jonathan Taylor as a top 10 running back going into the season, and most people didn't. But I could have never predicted that he'd put up the numbers that he did and be talked about as an MVP for a little bit. The Colts are another one of those teams that if you can get, they're one of those teams I think is probably a quarterback away. If you can get a quarterback, I think the Colts could be very good for a long while. And I'm honestly excited to see it. Now, third in the division, I had as the Jacksonville Jaguars. I had them going at 6-11, and they finished at 3-14. Honestly, even though they had such a rough season last year, I thought Trevor Lawrence was going to play a lot better than he did. Obviously, James Robinson missed some time. They lost their rookie running back for the entirety of the season. They didn't even get to see him a single game. So that is, obviously that factors into it, and I couldn't have predicted that. He didn't even have an injury history. So, also, the Jaguars last offseason did nothing but get new players. They really addressed the defensive side of the ball. They have Marvin Jones now, too. Overall, I thought they got a lot better, but I guess I was wrong. And a lot of that does have to do with the shortcomings of Trevor Lawrence this year and how abysmal that offensive line is overall. Plus, missing your running backs for a lot of the year is rough. But overall, again, I think I thought they were going to take a step in the right direction, and they just stayed at the bottom. So that's rough. I originally had the Houston Texans finishing fourth in the division. I had them going 1-16. I didn't think there was a chance. I thought there was an honest chance they didn't win a game without Deshaun Watson. They definitely played better than I thought they would. They got some wins that I definitely didn't think that they had a chance of winning. And honestly, I couldn't tell you why. I mean, I thought their coaching was abysmal this year, or I guess last year, which to be fair, it was. They signed 4 running backs and nothing else for some reason at one point. They were literally auctioning off players before the season started, for cheap prices. They said any veteran on the team was available, so I wasn't very high up on the Texans. Davis Mills was honestly the X factor. He played a lot better than I thought he was going to. He can make plays. He kind of reminds me of Taylor Heineke. I think overall the biggest thing though, the Texans just showed more heart than I expected. They played a very gritty style of football, but when push came to shove, they usually not usually, they ended up 4-11, but more times than I would have credited them for, they ended up getting wins when they probably shouldn't have. They played a very gritty style and just got the job done more than I thought they were going to, which is great. Again, I don't really think the future holds much for Houston. I think they're still in the middle of a pretty full-scale rebuild, but they are picking in the top 3, which means them and the Jaguars should potentially end up with one of the Kayvon Thibodeau or Aiden Hutchinson pairs, which is great. Now let's swap over to the NFC and start in the East and talk about one of the teams that surprised me in a bad way. So I had the Washington football team winning the East with an 11-6 record, and they ended at 7-10. This is honestly one of the most challenging ones for me to explain. Towards the end of last season, the Washington football team was one of the best teams in football. They willed their way into the playoffs, and they won a wild card game. Obviously, a big issue with the Washington football team is their quarterback play. Obviously, I don't think Taylor Heineke's the guy. Ryan Fitzpatrick obviously isn't the guy going into next season. But even then, at 7-10, they never really radiated one of those teams that's a player away. They had 50 put on their heads multiple times, I'm pretty sure. Their defense was abysmal. They were missing Chase Young for a good portion of the season. They're missing Matthew Ioannidis for a good portion of the season. But, even then, their secondary was a lot worse than I thought they should have been. Their defense as a whole, honestly, was a lot worse than than what I had anticipated. Offensively, I had given them an 11-6 record, even knowing who was playing quarterback. And, they played about what I had expected. I never expected a whole lot out of either of the quarterbacks that they had played. I think even at one point they were starting Kyle Allen. Terry McLaurin was not quite as good as I had expected either. Terry McLaurin would have weeks where he was amazing, but he'd also have weeks where he was basically non-existent in the offense. So overall, there's probably a lot of holes with Washington that I had not originally seen. Maybe a lot of injury concerns, but overall, they definitely were one of the most disappointing teams, at least according to what I had thought they were going to do. I had the Dallas Cowboys finishing second in the division at 10-7. They ended at 12-5 and took the division. Honestly, the Cowboys' schedule wasn't doing them any favors, and I wasn't extremely high on their defense either. Excuse me. They definitely did a lot better than I had expected. Dak Prescott took a lot less time to get back into the rhythm of things than I really thought he was going to. The Dallas Cowboys are another team that kind of started rough this season too. Their offense played about to be expected once Dak Prescott was back in the mix. Again, I did kind of anticipate that Zeke would miss some time, and he did. He usually does, but it wasn't really that impactful. Tony Pollard was one of the best second backs in the entire league, if not the best. So that really helped the Cowboys, and they could rely on him more than I thought that they were going to be able to. I also wasn't too sure how good their offensive line was going to be, given, some of them opted out, a lot of them missed time last year. The health of their offensive line and the availability of them was a question mark going into the year. Their defense was a lot better than I thought they were going to be. Trevon Diggs played really well. I've always been high on Trevon Diggs, but just as a whole, their defense outperformed what I thought that they were capable of. And honestly, the Dallas Cowboys are one of the teams to beat in the NFC. They're not my favorite. We'll get to my favorite here soon, but I was definitely a little bit wrong about the Cowboys. The third team in the division I had originally had is the New York Giants. I had them going at 7-10, and they ended 4-13 and last in the division. Overall, my reasoning, I thought the Giants were going to take a step in the right direction because they made a lot of signings in the offseason. They addressed wide receiver, they got Kenny Golladay, they got a lot of pieces to address defensively. They had a good draft. So overall, I really did think that the Giants were going to take a step in the right direction. I even factored in the fact that Saquon was probably going to miss time, because he always does. And of course he did. Ultimately, I wasn't really anticipating the absence of Daniel Jones, which on paper might not sound like a lot, but they did have to start Mike Glennon. And Daniel Jones is certainly a step over Mike Glennon. They also, in my opinion, I think they really underutilized Kenny Golladay. There were a lot of weeks where he was just completely absent for some reason. They weren't really giving him the ball as much as I thought they should have. Their offensive line was honestly worse than I thought it was going to be. There was a lot of injuries on that front, so can't really get too upset over that. They also didn't have the luxury of a good second down back like the Cowboys did. Defensively, it was about as expected. They weren't amazing defensively. I do think that they took a step in the right direction defensively this year. I thought their linebackers played pretty well. Their D-line's pretty decent. But a decent defense and a bad offense doesn't mean a good team. So they ended 4-13, and it's not really too surprising. They are one of the more disappointing teams, though. Now, another team that I was brutally wrong about is the Philadelphia Eagles. I had the Eagles going 4-13, and they ended 9-8. Going into the year, I didn't really think that Jalen Hurts was the guy for them. Also, I can't really remember if this was before or after the Carson Wentz trade. I'm going to assume that it was after. It was after. Even now, I'm not insanely high on Jalen Hurts. I don't know if he's the guy for the future, but he's certainly a decent quarterback at worst. He definitely played better than I thought he was going to. The Eagles overall, they surprised me for a lot of reasons. It's kind of hard to... They're another one of those teams that's kind of hard to explain exactly why they're as good as they are. They just are. Their defensive line is really good. The Eagles have a really good defensive line. Their defense definitely outperformed what I thought they would. And offense, as a whole team, they did. A lot of times when it's something like that, it could just be a full culture change within your coaching system or something like that. Maybe they got the best out of all their players. Maybe they were less banged up than other teams. They're another one of those teams that's going to be in the playoffs. I don't know how scared I would be of the Eagles in the playoffs. I definitely think they're one of the weaker playoff teams. But they certainly did a lot better than I had originally anticipated. When predicting the NFC South, I was pretty much as on as you can get. I started with the Buccaneers, who I had winning the division going 12-5. They ended up 13-4 and winning the division. Ultimately, I thought the Bucs were going to be a little bit worse this year. I just feel like the Bucs have a lot of aging pieces around. Not including Tom Brady. I realize that he's immortal, but other than Tom Brady, I felt like there were some potential holes that might make them a tad bit worse than last year. They were about as good as last year. So, the Buccaneers also were not the best team in football last year. They just weren't. Even if they won it all, they definitely went through a lot of tough sledding to get to where they got. It was far from a very smooth victory for them going to the Super Bowl. But they toughed it out. Honestly, I think there's a very good chance that they could do it again. They went to 13-4, and they, again, had a lot of missing people throughout that time. The one constant, though, was Tom Brady didn't miss any time, and he played a lot better than I thought he would this year. Even last year, I didn't really think Tom Brady was that good. In the regular season, Tom Brady had a lot of pretty awful performances. Even in the postseason, he looked abysmal sometimes in the postseason, but found a way to keep winning because of that defense. Overall, I do think that defense has taken a step down then from where they were last year. But at the same time, Tom Brady's definitely taken a step up, and it's kind of equaled each other out. I don't know how sustainable that is. Look at somebody like Mahomes. Mahomes, it's pretty rare that he finds a way to win if his defense lets up 40. So that's to be seen. Their defense isn't awful by any means, but again, I think they're not my favorite to win the NFC, but I do think that they could easily do it, and I wouldn't be shocked if they did. Now, second in the division, I had the Saints finishing at 9-8, and they finished at 9-8. So the Saints did about exactly as I had expected. Going into the year, I didn't know that Michael Thomas would end up missing the entire year. Couldn't have predicted that. I couldn't have predicted that Jameis Winston was going to get hurt. That being said, I don't think Jameis or Taysom are the future in New Orleans. I also don't know if they're one of those teams that's only going to get better from here. Also, the Saints' cap situation last year was abysmal. Like, honestly, the worst I've ever seen. So for them to finish 9-8 after all that, it's honestly remarkable. It's a testament to Sean Payton as a coach, honestly. Overall, the Saints probably did a little bit better than I expected, but at the same time, I don't know what the future holds if you're the Saints. They barely missed the playoffs this year, but they felt pretty optimal in doing it. So, who knows? Third in the division, I had the Panthers. I had the Panthers originally going 6-11 and having the tiebreaker over the Falcons, because I also had the Falcons at 6-11. They ended up at 5-12. Honestly, they played pretty much about what I expected. Their defense wasn't quite as good as I had thought they were going to be. I thought overall their defense was a pretty solid group, but they really weren't. I think they're a team that's honestly worse than 5-12. They started off really tough and kind of fell, or really good, but kind of fell apart in the latter half of not even the latter half, the last 13, 14 weeks, which was really tough to see. There's a lot of things for the Panthers, that there's a lot of holes that they can fill. I think overall, DJ Moore came out as a really good option. Obviously, I anticipated Christian McCaffrey missing some time. I didn't think he'd miss as much time as he did, though. I think they're pretty set. I think they're on offensively, if they can address offensive line a little bit, and maybe, I think they're one of those teams that could be a quarterback away if you give them a couple years. Their defense, I don't think, is bad. Their offense was, and I think mainly it comes from the offensive line and the quarterback position. Maybe you could address tight end, but even then, I don't think they're awful at tight end with Tommy Tremble. If you can keep Christian McCaffrey on the field, I think this could be a team that could look to make a push if you can address quarterback and among a couple other things. I had the Falcons going 6-11 and ending 4th in the division. They ended up going 7-10, which honestly is really big, seeing as they were without Calvin Ridley for a good chunk of the season. Their defense played a lot better than I thought they were going to. AJ Terrell took a step up, which was nice to see. Matt Ryan played well. Again, they were pretty average this year. They definitely played a little bit better than I thought they were going to, but overall, pretty much everything was to be expected with that Falcons team. Now let's talk about the NFC North. I originally had the Vikings winning the division at 10-7. In real life, they ended up going 8-9. The Vikings kind of seemed like one of those teams to me that when push came to shove down the stretch, they could not close out games. They lost a lot of games that they shouldn't have. It kind of seemed like a coaching thing to me. I know Mike Zimmer's kind of on the hot seat potentially. Kirk Cousins outplayed what I thought he would. Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen played about what I thought they would, given I thought that Adam Thielen would take a step down. Their offensive line honestly played really well. Christian Darrisaw, their first-round rookie, he was my favorite tackle last year, honestly. He contributed a lot. But again, kind of one of those teams that down the stretch couldn't get it done. I also think their defense wasn't quite as good as they were last year. And I don't really know what the future holds if you're the Vikings. I don't know how bright their future looks right now, given Kirk Cousins' age and everything else. They're far from a full-scale rebuild. I think they're a team that could re-up, and they should be fine. I originally had the Packers finishing second at 9-8, and they went 13-4 and took home the division. Now, this is the team that is my favorite to win the NFC right now, here today. They have been electric the last 14 weeks of the season. They're another one of those teams that started off really rocky. Back when I predicted them going 9-8, that was before Aaron Rodgers had announced that he was going to play. At the time when I announced that, it seemed like there was no chance in hell that Aaron Rodgers was going to play. So I think it would have been a lot different if I had done this when Aaron Rodgers was cleared to go. That's pretty much the only difference. I think other than Aaron Rodgers, they played about exactly as I had anticipated. I know Zaire Alexander missed some time, but even then, their other cornerbacks stepped up. Everyone other than Kevin King played pretty decently. Their defense was a little bit better than I thought they would be. But overall, the only thing that had me doubting this team was the play that I assumed out of Jordan Love when it was assumed that he was going to be the starter all year, which wasn't the case, luckily. Again, they are my favorite to win the NFC, and honestly, right now, I think they're my favorite to win the entire thing. Originally, I had third in the division going to the Bears. I had the Bears going 7-10, and they ended at 6-11. So I was pretty overall spot on with the Bears. Justin Fields played about what I had expected. Their running back play wasn't amazing or anything like that. Allen Robinson was really good most of the year. Their offensive line isn't amazing. Defensively, they definitely took a step back. But again, their defense was still pretty decent throughout the year. 6-11, 7-10, that's probably about where I had expected them to play. And they played about exactly to par. I don't know what the future holds for the Bears. I don't know how long Khalil Mack's going to be around. And a lot of those other pieces like Roquan Smith. But we'll see. I had the Lions in 4th going 4-13, and they ended 3-13-1. So pretty much exactly on point. The Lions, the reason that I had them winning games originally was because I thought they were going to be a team with a lot of heart. And that's exactly why the Lions win games. They're a team with a lot of heart. I'm not high on Jared Goff, really. He's one of those guys that is kind of like a watered-down Teddy Bridgewater. Perfectly average, but he's perfectly, below average. So, he's probably the 20th quarterback in the league, consistently. They also lost a lot of pieces. Obviously, Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones. DeAndre Swift played amazingly. I had anticipated that. I was very high on DeAndre Swift. Penei Sewell was pretty good most of the year for him. Other than Penei Sewell, though, I'm not extremely impressed with anybody on their offensive line. Took them a while to win a game, but it seemed like they were always like one play away, one or two, breaks. Defensively, the Lions are a lot better than you'd think. Their defensive line's pretty decent. Obviously, they were without... Sorry, I'm doing a lot of talking for this video. It's kind of running me dry. Who is it? Their fourth... They were without their second-year cornerback for basically the entire year. In fact, I think he got hurt before the season even started. I can think of everything except his name. It's amazing. Cornerback, Ohio State, 4th overall pick. Now, why can't I think of his name? No idea. I think, what is his name? Amani Oruwariye. Their other corner, I thought that he really stepped up this year and played really well. Even if they ended like this, they are a really young team. TJ Hawkinson had a good year. There's a lot to look forward to for the Lions, honestly. There's a lot to address, obviously, but I think they have a lot of young pieces that I'd be really excited for in the future. And finally, let's go talk about the NFC South. Originally, I had the Seahawks winning the division at 12-5. They ended 7-10. I know Russell Wilson missed a good chunk of time there during the season. But this is another one that they were just really disappointing. Injuries were a big factor for the Seahawks. But their defense is one of the worst I've ever seen, I think, genuinely. There's some decent pieces in there. I think Jamal Adams played pretty decently most of the year, but I knew their defense was bad, but God, they were a lot worse than I had thought they were going to be. But I thought, offensively that they would offset that, but I think a lot of their offense took a step in the wrong direction this year with DK Metcalf and Lockett. A lot of that has to do with porous quarterback play when Russell Wilson was out, but I didn't think neither of them really matched what they did last season. That being said, if Russell Wilson played the entire season, I'm sure this is probably a team that fights into the playoffs, but they're certainly worse than I had anticipated. They also had, Chris Carson missed some time, Rashad Penny missed some time. Rashad Penny had some really good games in there too, though. So, who knows? I don't know how bright the future is with the Seahawks. They need to worry about retaining Russell Wilson on top of everything, and there's a lot of holes to fill. Basically, the entire defense. So, they again, could potentially be the worst defense I've ever seen in football. It was really, really bad. Now, the second team that I had here was the Rams. I had them going 10-7, and they finished 12-5 and took home the division title. I wasn't overly high on the Rams. I like Matt Stafford a lot. He definitely played a lot better than I thought he was going to. I had him probably the 11th quarterback in the league, somewhere around there. Like borderline top 10 quarterback in the league. In hindsight, a lot of that probably was the Lions system more than anything else. This was also before Cam Akers' injury. I had absolutely no idea that Cooper Kupp was going to be as good as he was. Even I was relatively high on Cooper Kupp, but who could have predicted the season that he was going to have? The Rams defensively really did hold up. Not that I thought the Rams had one of the best defenses in the league, but they were, even with that, they were better than I thought they were going to be. And pairing Matthew Stafford with them, the Rams definitely were better than I thought they were going to be. And a lot of that had to do with Matthew Stafford playing a lot better than I thought he was going to, and Cooper Kupp blowing expectations out of the water. Hopefully they can get Cam Akers back healthy and try to make a run for a title. They've been sputtering the last couple weeks, so who really knows? Matt Stafford especially has struggled the last couple weeks, including a loss today to the 49ers. That looked really rough. It's another one of those losses that could spiral a team potentially. They lost a 15-point lead or 16-point lead in the second half. Third, I had the Arizona Cardinals going 10-7. They ended 11-6, and for a while they were the top team in football. They definitely didn't end like that. I'm very high on the Cardinals. Even with a 10-7 record, they're one of those teams that kind of got, obviously they're in the toughest division in football. So they were definitely one of those teams that I thought were a lot better than what their record shows. Same with the Rams. I thought both of those teams were better than 10-7. It's just when you play in this division, that's tough enough, plus their outside schedule was not any easier. But the Cardinals finishing 11-6 isn't really a shocker to me. AJ Green played better than I thought he was going to. That's really only the only player on that. Oh, James Conner. James Conner played a lot better than I thought he was going to. He was amazing in the red zone for the Cardinals. If James Conner's healthy, he's really probably a top 15 running back. Probably 13th, 12th, if he's healthy. And I just assumed when doing this that he wasn't going to stay healthy because he never has, but he did. And the Cardinals were definitely better with him on the field. Defensively, they played great. I forget, week one against the Titans, they had a player open with 5 sacks, which was absolutely ridiculous. 5 sacks in a single game against Taylor Lewan is nothing to scoff at. I don't know why I'm blanking on names tonight. I think it's because I'm trying to recount so many different names that it's just slipping my mind. I had the 49ers finishing last in the division at 9-8. They ended 10-7. So pretty much right there. The 49ers, the big question mark for me was their health. Who knew if they're going to be able to stay healthy? Last season was really rough for them in the way of injuries. And it's hard to say if you can rebound from that 100%. Deebo Samuel was a top 5 wide receiver in football this year. Jimmy Garoppolo played pretty well. He played a lot better than I had originally given him credit for, honestly. Overall, they definitely dealt with injuries, but not to the capacity of last season, which I think was definitely the difference maker and where I went wrong in my original prediction. But again, the thing with these predictions is you're going to be wrong more than you're right, and I think that's where the fun comes into it all. So again, there were a lot of teams that, surprised me a lot more than others. The whole point of predictions, is to see where you go wrong. There's nothing that's ever set in stone, and that's the reason that we watch sports to begin with. If we just knew day one exactly what every team was going to be like, it would be really, really boring. So that's one of the many, many reasons that I love doing predictions like these. Anyways, that is where I will leave it off. Again, I feel like overall I did pretty good with my original predictions. A lot better than I thought I did back when I originally started planning for this video. But I do hope you guys enjoyed. It's a different style of video too. I don't exactly know how I'm going to do it. It's going to take a lot of work though, so I would really appreciate it if you guys would leave a like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me because this is going to take me hours upon hours to edit. Anyways, I will see you guys in the next video of whatever I decide to make. Peace.